Assalamualaikum and welcome back to ESC 46OP, Energy Systems and Environment. So today the topic is about energy sustainability. Okay. But if you look at the list of topics that we did on the first week, you would notice that it's actually the time for socio-economics of energy. However, I will attempt to include that in this topic instead, because it actually covers most of all the social and economics part. Okay, so without further ado, let's go and have a look at the learning outcomes. Okay, if you see the learning outcomes, first is to discuss the sustainability of fossil fuels, and other types of energy. You see, for the past few weeks, we've looked at many different energy resources, natural resources. We've looked at renewable and non-renewable energy as well. Okay, and as you learn about that, you might notice that the sustainability is very, very much related to, it's a very complex thing. It's not simply about, okay, this is, the fossil fuels are detrimental to the environment, okay, then just switch. It doesn't happen like that. Why? Because it's a fairly complex situation. It's not only talking about specific systems, you also have the relationship with other things as well. So the people who are working in that specific industry, okay, the people who are getting the benefits, in terms of current limitations, things like cars. You cannot expect everyone to use electric cars. A lot of people can't afford that car. Okay, so those are the things that we have to think about. And then to assess the impacts of energy generation towards social economy and the environment. Okay, so if you look at that, that is actually the elements of sustainability. Now, sustainability has three pillars: the social part or the people part, the economy, or as the dollar and cents, and lastly the environment. Okay, those are the three main elements, three pillars of sustainability. Okay. Very quickly, we'll have a look at the definition of sustainability. There's so many different terms. And a lot of, if you have a look at a lot of policy papers, and not only in Malaysia, but worldwide, a lot of people uses this definition. It's the development that meets the needs of the present, okay, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that covers about everything. So it's development, as people live, as our population thrives, development must happen. Right? It must happen. We cannot expect things to regress. We cannot go back to the Stone Age. Okay, we have to become more and more civilized. Okay? However, whatever that you do now, it must be in such a way that is not detrimental to the future generation. You need to leave the world, the earth, hospitable for your children and their children and their children. Okay, it's this is what we're talking about when we talk about sustainability. So whatever choice that we make now, we have to think about the effect to the future, right? So these are some of the definitions. You can always have a look at that. And of course, I guess sustainability as a term, it's a very, very big word. It's a buzzword. Everyone is using that right now. If you look at the papers, your generation doesn't read papers, I think. You would rely more on the web, social media, and all. However, still, you might come across sustainability being used so frequently. It's a word that, corresponds with so many things. Whatever thing that you do, people will ask, is this sustainable? And the way you can answer, yeah, it's sustainable, or no, it's not sustainable. But what exactly is the element that allows you, that gives you enough backing to say that, yes, this is sustainable, or no, this is not sustainable? Relating back to what I said just now, there's 3 pillars for sustainability. Now, we just have a look as in terms of the environment. Now we look around the climate now. It's really, really crazy, isn't it? We have a lot of flooding. There's some places who have prolonged drought. They don't receive enough water. Okay, and some places where it's never been flooded, now it's flooded. We have a lot of things like natural disasters all over the world, and this is the impacts of climate change. And people always say climate change and greenhouse gas is very much related. It's greenhouse effect. Now we are heating up the earth because there's an abundance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. I'm sure you've learned this in your climate change course. I'm not sure if you've taken that yet, but if you don't, then I'm sure this is part of the general knowledge already. Okay, so climate change and greenhouse gas cannot be separated. So where does this greenhouse gas come from? So if we look at this, our world in data here, this is actually a database, and you can actually access it. There's a lot of information, open source information in there, okay, on so many different things. So one of it is on emission. So if you just look at globally, the emission by sector, we have so many different sectors, right? If you look at that, energy actually generates around 73.2%. Can you imagine? Almost 3/4 of the whole emission in the whole world is generated through energy. Now, how much is that? And you can see here, if you look further in more detail, in industry is 24.2%, transportation is 16.2%, and we also have things like building. So this is where, your homes, the universities, so on and so forth. That is basically where we are. Okay. Transportation, because we're talking about energy, so it's not only electricity. It's things like the petrol fuels, diesel, all of that used in transportation. The energy that is generated, for sure, it comes with some emissions. No matter how good it is, there will be some emissions released to the atmosphere. And lastly is industry. So just by looking at that, we can see that energy actually has a lot of impacts towards the climate change. So I'm sure you all know already, greenhouse gas is not only carbon dioxide, it's containing other things as well. Things like methane, nitrous oxide, F gases. So these are the examples of greenhouse gas. It's all these species of gas that together they form the greenhouse gas emission in our atmosphere. Okay, so if we just look at that, now of course the global greenhouse gas emission is actually monopolized by carbon dioxide is 74%. However, the others are also a lot. 17% of methane, and methane is much, much worse. The effect of the greenhouse gas effect is much worse compared to carbon dioxide. Yeah. So if we have a look here, the primary energy consumption by source. Now we have a look, just now we look at the percentage for energy, 74%. So from all of that, if you just look at it in terms of different energy resource, such as oil, coal, gas, and also the renewables, you can see even now, of course, this is until 2019. You can always have a look at the latest data. So up to 2019, we are still totally, well, not totally, okay, mostly dependent on the fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. And that's how when we compare the emissions, of course, you've learned already, right? When oil is burned, when coal is burned to produce energy, the carbon emitted is a lot more compared to things like hydropower. It doesn't really produces CO2. Okay, things like nuclear, wind, solar, so all of these others, they don't really produce CO2. Okay, which is why we are looking at energy transition. We are trying to move away from the fossil fuels, okay, to the renewables. Yeah, because we know that although the people are dependent, something has to be done before we reach a point of no return. Right. So who has contributed most to global CO2 emission? So actually, if you have a look at that, the North Americas, they have a lot of 25% of global cumulative emission, USA alone. Yeah, and EU actually only 22% of global cumulative emission. China 12.7%. So you can see actually, if you relate back to earlier, countries that has a lot of industries, they, in a way, they generate a lot more emissions. Yeah, because it makes sense, because they have a lot more industries. These industries require energy, and whatever the country has to supply, they have to supply to the industry, the energy. So whatever happens, it all lead to an increase in the CO2 emissions all over the world. Okay. So energy, it's sometimes we look at it, it's somewhat invisible. We don't really see how it links with other things. We just see, oh, electricity, turn on the switch, turn off the switch, and that's it. But it actually is something that weaves together the economy, the human development, and environmental society. So this is something that the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon had mentioned. Because if you think about it, without energy, there's no progress. Imagine if you ever look back in history books, human civilization, it sparks when humanity discovered fire. Okay, with fire, so many different things that they can actually start trying to do. Okay, before there was fire, you actually had to live in very cold condition. The mortality rate is very, very high. Okay, if you want to hunt, you just use things like spear, okay, things that you have to sharpen yourself. Yeah? But with fire, you start to get, the people back then lah, they start to have a better quality of life. They can start to cook. And slowly the mortality rate decreases. So a lot more people survive. They can actually discover more and more things. That it was fire. And then if you look at the discovery of oil, and how it sparked the Industrial Revolution, it all links together. Because now the world has access to easy energy. Back then, oil, because it can generate a lot more power rather than you just use things like wood. You burn it up, use that to power engines. Now you can just use oil. That gives the industry a boost. Now people can actually do a lot more things. They can be more innovative. They start to design things. They're able to do that because they know, okay, this thing can be powered by something. And that's where energy comes in. And you can see all of these are interlinked together. All the scientific discoveries, all the cultural advances, it all links back to energy. Okay. So here I've mentioned things like health and lifestyle, life expectancy. And now if you see, people live longer because we have access to better lifestyle, we have access to more and more health equipment. Now you are able to prolong life. And then environmental progress in terms of we are able to utilize what is around us, okay, to help our development. Now we start to go into very smart agriculture, for example, because if you think about it, things like IR 4.0, we weave these technological advances into traditional things. So now people use drones. From if you have a look at the crops in agriculture, you just use drones and you can detect, okay, this area may need more fertilizer, or this area has some insect or pest infestation. You can do it just through the drone, and then the drone, through the data, you can just send people, deploy people to that specific area, rather than you have to have a lot of labor, and then goes to cater for the whole plantation, for example. People can require a lot of labor, and sometimes you miss certain spots or whatever, but through the drones, it becomes more and more advanced. It becomes more better in terms of monitoring. Okay, so all of this, saying this, we know that that's the benefit of energy and what it brings to everyone, to the world. But we know just now, right, in terms of the environmental impact, we know that things need to change. And as part of the SDG, if you know, clean energy is one of the goals, okay, the world has actually adopted the goal of achieving 100% access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy by 2030. That's what we aspire for as a whole world. Okay. But if you see, just now when I talk about the US, China, and Europe, right? If you look at that, it actually, energy use is not, how do we say this? Dia tak seimbang lah. It's not comparable throughout the world. Okay, there are some places in worldwide. Okay, there are some countries that actually they don't have access to energy. They don't have. So if you have a look here, now for example, this is if we compare it through income, the low, middle, and high income countries. The lower income countries, they don't have access to electricity, or even if they do, very, very minimal. Okay, look at here. Compare that to the high and upper middle income countries. And they have a lot more access. Yeah, and that's what I mentioned before as well. The access to energy actually propels certain industry. And if, places like in Germany, they actually have this access, and their industry is much, much more advanced at an earlier time, that means that by this time, by now, which is why they are a high income country. And they have a lot more time to prosper compared to other countries. Yeah, so in places in the lower income countries, they rely more on things like biomass. If you look here, okay, the green one actually they use, because they don't have access to electricity. And so what they do is they burn things like wood, okay, to generate energy. So usually to cook, even to cook, they don't really have access. Okay, so they had to burn the biomass, and that's what is happening in places like Ethiopia, Congo. A lot of African countries are facing that issue. Okay, and then if you see here, one more thing that I want to highlight, okay, energy use per capita. Okay, meaning that for the population, okay, the amount of energy that is used. So if you see here, the low income countries, they have very low energy use per capita. Okay, and that makes sense because they don't have access to electricity. But if we look at the higher income countries, look there, they have higher, like 3 or 4 times higher. And Germany is even higher lah, almost like 90% of energy use. Sorry, here is 2 point, okay, the orange one is right axis. So almost like 3 dia punya ton per capita. So that's how, when we look at that, you have to start thinking. This is the scenario in the world. Okay, the lack of access has so many implications. Okay, so as mentioned before, we go back to sustainability. Sustainability has 3 pillars: social, the environment, and the economy. Okay, so as a base lah, as a basic knowledge, no form of energy is possible without changing the environment. As it is, you have the river, you have the sun. If you don't do anything, you don't actually get to harness that energy, right? So all of this actually requires land, it requires resources, investments, okay? And when it is done, when the energy is produced, it also produces waste. Okay, so that is the impact or the relationship to environment. Okay, and then the economy, of course, just now I mentioned resources and investment, right? So that's the link. That's the better the economy is, then the higher amount of capital you can spend for development. If you look at things as a country, right? And of course, another thing is that the economy itself, they actually requires affordable, abundant, and reliable energy. Okay, if you just think about Petronas, okay, Petronas pay a lot to the government, in terms of the access to the petroleum resources in Malaysia. and also elsewhere lah, but we're talking about Malaysia right now. Okay, and then they paid a lot. Okay, and at the same time, if you look at the economy, if the price of energy is high, okay, eventually the income that Petronas gets will become smaller. Okay, and a lot of people only stop there. They will say, alah, Petronas ni kurang dapat duit kan. So dia fikirkan bonus staff Petronas contohnya lah. Okay, but you have to look at this from a higher level. If this happens, right, if Petronas make losses, they are not able to pay, or rather to pay tax lah to the Malaysian government. And when this happens, the economy actually suffers. Right? The government do not have enough money to look at, to take care of the country. Yeah. So when we look at a situation, you have to look at it in an overall view. Right. So that is economy. Lastly is social. Okay, basic social standards to attain universal human rights and basic necessities require basic access to affordable clean energy. So this is what we're talking about in UNSDG, clean energy. One of the goals is access to energy, because if you remember the previous slide, the lower income countries, they are people as well. What's the difference between them and the people from the higher income countries? They are people. So they actually have the same rights. Yeah, if we're talking about the global people, we're not talking about the countries itself, because there's so many different complexities, but the rights are there. So this will link back, when people say, okay, that is their country, so let them handle it. But if we look at it in a global situation, something has to be done. People from the higher income countries should take part in trying to provide this access to those who need it. And this is happening currently. So a lot of these high income countries, they give things like funds, and they give support, the financial support to these countries, so that they are able to generate their infrastructure. Okay, they are able to build the energy structure for the country. So this is happening, and we see that more and more apparent now, but before it wasn't that much. But now it's getting better and better. Okay, so basically these three pillars are inseparable, but they are sometimes clashing and sometimes complementary. Yeah, because sometimes you want things to be profitable. Okay, but then some people may not get benefit from it. Yeah, so that's where sometimes it is clashing. But sometimes things that benefit the people also benefits the environment. So this is complementary. So overall, from all of this, okay, just have to remember, resources is what we have, production is what we make, lifestyle is how we use it. Okay, and resources here is actually the environment. The production is the economy. Okay, and lifestyle is the social part. So that's how you can look at it. A very general, in very general term lah. Okay. So unsustainable energy means that you sacrifice the environment in favor of the rest lah. So economy, things like for the social development, yeah, but you sacrifice the environment. So it's not sustainable in the long run. Okay. Which is why the UN SDGs was developed. So there's 17 different goals. And if you look at the SDG website, each of these has a very specific aim. And it's very easy nowadays. It's very easy because they update this very frequently, and you can see the efforts being done all over the world. It's not only like very specific countries, but all over the world. You can see what people are doing to achieve all the 17 goals. Okay. Now, so you can read this up as you go along the lecture note later on. Okay, I will stop here for this slide. Now, energy and the SDG. Okay, of course. Sorry, guys. All right. So basically, if we go next slide, sorry. Okay, so if we look at energy and the SDGs, where it actually links. Okay, poverty. Yeah, families, they can actually save money and time due to reduced fuel demand for cooking and lighting. This is if they have the energy access. If they don't, then they will need. I attended one Viva session of a student from Nigeria. Yeah, and he said that based on his observation, so he was telling stories about what is happening in Nigeria. So people had to carry wood, from very long distances, bring back to their homes, and they had to use that to cook food because they don't have access to, like, for us, we have LNG, liquid natural gas. You can just use the stove and you get fire. But for them, they don't have access to that, so they have to use biomass. They have to use wood and similar things. Okay, so it takes time. If you lose all that time only for that, and you look at it from a country level, okay, all the effort goes to that rather than, for the development of the country. That's poverty. Hunger. Food must be cooked. And things like all the economic activities that actually require energy. If people don't have access, these all took a lot of effort. And that's why the economy cannot prosper. Health, education, gender equality. So there's a lot of places where energy actually plays a very big part. Okay, so as a conclusion, sustainable energy is the key to sustainable development, and it's interspaced everywhere throughout the 17 goals. And these terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but is it similar? Renewable, sustainable, or low carbon? Okay, so sustainable is actually less black and white compared to renewable, and renewable does not always mean sustainable. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to convey, because with sustainability, you actually have the three things, the three pillars, and you can actually assess whether eventually is it sustainable or not based on these three pillars. But in terms of renewable, renewable, it's not always sustainable. Okay, so the basic difference between renewable and non-renewable, between renewable and sustainable. Okay, so for example, if you receive a yearly salary of $1 million, 1 million ringgit, this is reliable, not like one-off. So this is sustainable, so in the long run, and it is renewable because you receive this yearly. Okay, but it becomes non-sustainable, okay, if you still receive it like every month, Okay, but your salary is 100, not sustainable, because in terms of the economy, what is the basic living requirement? I mean, in terms of the cost, the 100 is definitely not enough. So it's still renewable, but it's not sustainable. Okay, what about if you win 1 million ringgit, okay, in a contest? It's one off. So one off meaning that it's not renewable, okay, but it is sustainable in a way, because you have like 1 million and then you can use that to cover your expenses for the rest of your life. This is like back towards your spending habits lah. Kalau you borrow apa, sejuta pun tak cukup kan. Okay, and then let's say the final example would be you receive PTPTN, okay, for 20,000 for 4 years of study. So let's say that is the amount. So it's non-renewable because you receive it like one lump sum like that. And then it is not sustainable for the rest of your life. So you cannot just live off on 20,000, okay, for the rest of your life lah. Okay, so it's non-sustainable and it's non-renewable. So that is the example, or rather the comparison between renewable and sustainable. Okay, but if we think about this in terms of energy, so wind power. Wind power is renewable, okay, tapi it's intermittent. Sometimes when there's no wind or the wind speed is very, very low, it may come to a point where the energy generated is not enough. Okay, meaning that it is renewable, but it's non-sustainable. Whereas in terms of cooking oil, cooking fuel, okay, and we use this from the biomass, like I mentioned before, it's renewable because pokok, trees, they regenerate. You keep on planting new trees to replace the ones that you've already cut down. So it's, in a way, it's renewable, but it's not sustainable because in terms of the environmental impact and also the health impact. Okay, and then again, one final thing, like from solar. Solar is very, 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 very popular. People can just usually nowadays it's almost like plug and play. You buy the solar PV, you plug it, and then you simply generate electricity. Okay, but if you think throughout its life cycle, you guys have learned already what is contained inside PV. Okay, those rare minerals that you use to produce those solar PV, the mining itself, it's not always environmentally friendly. Okay, there are causes of pollution, maybe also related to deforestation. And then you also have to remember with solar PV, it has its own lifetime. It cannot be used forever. Okay? So at the end of its life, you will need to treat this material. And some of the materials, if not properly treated, may cause environmental damage. Okay, so this is when we start to look at things as a system. And you guys, I hope you still remember, I always like to use the representation of a system like it's one whole system. Your body is a system, the whole body is a system. You eat something, and then you do work, you do something, So we need to have a look at the energy system as a whole, and look at trying to reduce the emission systematically across all of these elements. Okay, we have, of course, first things first, we start with the primary energy resources. Yeah. So from this, some of it is transformed into usable energy, yeah, in terms of electricity. There are non-usable energy, something like heat. And if you the waste heat of a process, that is considered as non-usable energy because it is still a form of energy, yeah, but you do not utilize it, so it's non-usable. Okay, usable energy is electricity, and only that portion of usable energy is used as for the energy services. The waste, you cannot use it in terms of when you're trying to supply electricity ke, yeah, fuel ke, there are some waste associated with it. Okay, so a systemic approach look at this whole ecosystem as separate entities, but feed each other. They are interlinked. So if you want to reduce an overall emission from the energy system, you have to consider all of this. It also relates back to things like life cycle. Yeah, people do LCA, for example, for a product's lifetime, yeah, and they see where exactly is the environmental impact of that product, yeah, and the carbon emissions, so on and so forth. And you can actually try to target which area that requires improvements. Okay, so these are some examples. If you're looking at this area, primary energy resources, we have a lot. We have things like fossil fuels, we have solar, we have wind, so many of those resources. One example is you switch to a low carbon primary energy resources. So instead of having fossil fuels, you start going into, you know, it's a gradual lah. If you're looking at cars, cars, the engine, they were not built to run on other things other than gasoline, if it's a gasoline car. Yeah. So you cannot simply, okay, I want to stop today, I want to use solar without the specific equipment necessary. You're not an electric car, that is a petrol car, so you need to use petrol. However, you can start to use a blend. Of course, this is not possible yet in Malaysia, yeah, but it's some of the way we can do this lah, yeah, to still cater for the limitations in terms of the engine. Okay. We start to blend the fossil fuels with biofuels, for example. So slowly we transition through that way. In terms of usable energy, yeah, so electricity just now. Okay, you can switch to low carbon final energy. Yeah, things like hydrogen. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have heard about hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very, very clean fuel. You burn it and it only produces water, okay, and energy. So basically that's how we try, okay, because it's usable energy. It's just that it requires very specific logistical aspects. You may need a fuel cell to run on hydrogen, yeah, but it is something possible. Okay, and then if you look at in terms of energy services, we can go through the route of reducing energy demand, yeah, as a whole. Yeah. So if so I don't know if you notice, like usually on Earth Day, a lot of countries all over the world, they do things like switch off your electricity for 1 hour. They try to do that. It's to create awareness. Right? It's to create this habit, trying to save. If everyone turn off their electricity in 1 hour, maybe in the future, and they will start to think, oh, okay, actually my habit is doing something to the environment. And they will start to, okay, maybe I need to be more careful. When I go out, I have to turn off my fan or lamps. Yeah, all of those things. We are trying to do this in an overall manner. Okay. But all of this is actually, the main point is that we need to reduce loss and improve efficiency towards the final aim of getting a very efficient energy system with lower emissions, right? So very simply, if we look at energy and the environment, the social and economic elements, it actually encompass so many things. I've already mentioned this before. Yeah, here it is once more. But especially in terms of social and economy. Social, we look at perception. Yeah, if just now I talk about the knowledge, the behavior of people. Okay. If the perception is that electricity is cheap, electricity is non-polluting, and people will not change. You need to change the perception. You need to know that behind every piece of equipment, there's actually an environmental cost to it. And then you would try to optimize your use. Okay. So I've mentioned this just now as well, LCA, but we also have things like techno-economic assessment, socio-economic assessment. So these are some of the ways, some of the approaches where you can study, what is the impacts of social and also economy towards a project. If you ever become a consultant, and you are asked to study or assess the socio-economic sustainability or feasibility study. So these are the things that you have to look at. All right. Now, sorry. This is mostly about, again, about the sustainability. And when we look at these specific elements with the addition of technology here, okay, first, whatever energy system that you are proposing or you want to bring forth, you look first towards the effect to the environment. Okay, does it have an adverse impact? Yeah, does it actually help to solve the carbon emission? Things like that. That's the environment. Social, if the project can create jobs, and you can actually, the people can actually benefit from such things. That is the social part of it. Whereas in terms of the economics, it's the dollar and cents lah. Yeah, so whatever that relates to things like budget or capital and money, that is the economics. And encompassing all of this is the availability of many different technologies and applications. You've learned before about trying to do zero waste, for example, waste to energy. These sort of things you try, and you try to make use of something that is non-usable into something that can actually make profit. But at the same time, it also helps to protect the environment. And it creates jobs for the people. And you eventually, with these things being applied, the people would benefit. And their lifestyle change, Yeah, they become more prosperous, things like that. Okay. So sustainability can be quantified. Yeah. You can use this equation called IPAT. So it's environmental impact equals to population times affluence times technology. So this is too general. Okay, so it can actually be translated into this. So the environmental impact is the number of people that is affected, okay, times the number of products per person, times the environmental impact per product. So you can actually get an index, yeah, of what the environmental impact is, right? So this is here just to show you that a lot of countries all over the world are now transitioning, yeah, from the fossil fuels into renewable energy. Now, a lot of the countries are doing that. And we see this, of course, mostly in the high income countries lah. But not all. Yeah, we do see some other countries as well who are in a good situation or in a good location, yeah, that can actually make full use of their resources. And because you know that there's a lot of different energy systems, okay, and if they are at an area, you know, where the wind speed is very, very high, and they can actually utilize that. Yeah? Whereas other countries who doesn't have, you know, access to the sea, for example, they can't really do that, and they don't have, and they have, for example, 4 seasons, okay, and the summer months is, you know, the intensity of the sunlight is not that much, so it doesn't make sense to fully invest in solar. They may go through a different route, but what's interesting is people are transitioning. Yeah, as I said before, under UN SDG, we are trying to achieve 2030 aims. Yeah, so that 100% of clean energy, yeah, can be supplied to the global population. All right. And if you just look at the socio-economic footprint, yeah, so please bear in mind when I say socio and economy, what it relates to. Okay, but basically the economy, we can look at the GDP, gross domestic products. At the higher, and this is actually related to income lah, income of the country. Okay, the higher it is means that the country generates more income. So they are more prosperous. Yeah. In terms of welfare, this is in terms of the social. Yeah. So through the energy transition, it actually showed a positive impact in terms of the social economy, and the GDP increases, create more jobs, and the welfare as resulting from that is also increased. Okay. So there's actually an index called Energy Transition Index. Yeah? And it is considering this, of course, in terms of the sustainability. Yeah, but the specific things or items that they look at is here: capital investment, regulation and political commitment, institution and governance, infrastructure and innovative business environment, human capital and consumer participation, and lastly, energy system structure. So these are the things, the items that they assess to finally give a country a score. Yeah, and that score is in terms of index. So in this, the latest one is, of course, that's 2022, I think, already published, but this is 2021. Singapore leads Asian countries. And they are at number 21 here. Okay, so if you look at all the leaders of the scoreboard, you can look at all these countries. They are very, very good in terms of energy sustainability, right? And that's it for me. I hope you guys have learned a lot. Yeah, and please, I'll see you in the next time in the next lecture. Right? Thank you. Bye.